Hello everybody and welcome back to another not applicable Formula 1 video. I hope that you're well. I hope you're ready and raring to go for 2022. And a man who I also hope is ready and raring to go for 2022 is this man here, George Russell, moving to Mercedes, joining the 7-time world champion in Lewis Hamilton at the top of the grid for the 2022 season. After spending 3 years at Williams, he is finally getting that step up. And Valtteri Bottas has finally, shuffled out of the way for him so he can take that seat. And I want to sort of talk about George Russell because I think it's one thing to excel at a team like Williams at the back of the grid. I think it's a completely different question to excel at one of the top teams when that expectation is incredibly high. And therefore, I've got a few questions about George Russell that I'd like to answer. I'd love to know your opinions about these in the comments down below. And we'll try and see if we can come up with how well George Russell will do in 2022. So let's take a little step back into George Russell's sort of first steps into Formula 1. It actually started with a very, very impressive campaign in Formula 2 where he comfortably lifted the Formula 2 championship over drivers like Norris and Albon and actually his eventual teammate Latifi as well. He got 7 wins over the course of that season and 11 podiums split over feature races and sprint races and showed massive promise, picking up 287 points in that season. And it was actually the season before he signed for Mercedes when he was in GP3 and won that championship as well. But this really consolidated that we were looking at a driver who was going to be something special and was definitely going to get that step up into Formula 1. And this is how Toto Wolff kind of lined him up with that Williams seat for the 2018 season. And stepping up into that seat, he did incredibly well. Toto Wolff lined that up for him. And I don't think we can have much argument that George Russell has been an incredible driver whilst at Williams. And, he's been compared to Kubica and Latifi and now is stepping up and being compared to Lewis Hamilton. So it's quite a big change for him. Though saying that, his qualifying pace has always been the one for me. We've talked about it this season. Latifi finally managed to out-qualify George Russell. But if we just look at some of the statistics from George Russell's qualifying this season, it is absolutely obscene. He was just so quick. Throughout the season, he managed to, let's face it, in the 9th fastest car, average a grid position of 13th. That is insane. Qualifying in Q3 4 times, reaching Q2 19 times over the course of 22 races. And of course, that second place in Belgium being the real standout result there. And actually, from that grid position of an average of 13th, he was able to finish in an average place of 12.59. So during the races, not only was he qualifying exceptionally high, he was then making up ground in the races too. So he had an exceptional 2022. And now I think the 2022 season is a big turning point for George Russell because it was always whether or not he could get points in the Williams car. 2019, there was no chance whatsoever. He was never going to pick up points in that car, what has been deemed as one of the worst Formula 1 cars possibly ever in the history of Formula 1. But then 2020 saw him get a few near misses with the points due to little errors on restarts or whether it was spinning behind the safety car. He ended up missing out on points in quite a few crucial moments in 2020. And of course, we then had the Sakhir Grand Prix in 2020 as well, where he should have won that race. Let's not beat around the bush. He should have won that race, and we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail later. But it saw him get 9th place for Mercedes. He managed to pick up some points, but obviously it wasn't in that Williams car. The Williams points sort of eluded him until 2021. But 2021 saw him pick up points in 4 different Grand Prix, and it was a really, really good campaign from George Russell in terms of points in that Williams car. 4 out of 22 races in what I said, is the 9th slowest, or the 9th fastest car on the grid, the 2nd slowest car on the grid on average in terms of pace in the races. He did incredibly well, and 2021 saw him pick up those points, obviously get that huge 2nd place finish. Could have even picked up more points over the course of the season if you wouldn't have crashed into Valtteri Bottas and an Austria race that just went really, really poorly for Williams over the course of it. So having said that, scoring 4 points, missing out on a couple of points finishes and still being able to get Hungary, Belgium, Monza and Russia over the line, I think Mercedes' hand was forced here when he got that second place finish in Spa. I think George Russell basically said to Mercedes, you need to sign me now or other teams are going to come calling. And I think that was what pushed them to really step up and take that seat and give it to George Russell as soon as possible and find a seat for Valtteri Bottas elsewhere. So what can we expect from George Russell in 2022 as he steps up to be with these guys at the top of the grid more often? So first of all, I think we're guaranteed to see him get his first ever pole position in Formula One. I don't think that's even questionable at this point. He is labelled Mr. Saturday for a reason. As I just said, he qualified 13th on average, considering he was in the 9th slowest car. He has just got qualifying ability that no one else on the grid seemingly has in a similar vein. Like, in the slowest possible car, he was still able to get performance out of it. And his qualifying ability at Williams, I think, will translate over to the Mercedes car quite comfortably, and therefore I think we will see him pick up grid positions. He'll be continually in Q3. I know that's an expectation when you're in a Mercedes car, but I think he'll continually be in those Q3 positions and possibly, battling in and around those top 5 every single qualifying session. And we've seen through other racing series that he's been able to convert poles to wins to then championships. And whether he'll be able to follow that same suit in a Mercedes car, I think he'll definitely be able to convert poles to wins. The next step is whether he's got that ability to step up in the championships. I think the main questions that I've got in terms of George Russell's racing ability, I think his qualifying is what it is, but his racing ability does sometimes come under question. I mean, we've got to be, careful about how we talk about this because he is in a very, very slow car. But in terms of the Williams car, he was never really able to make up that many positions on the first lap of a race. I don't know if he's got that same guile. And that's something that has been thrown at him over the course of his Williams career. The ability to pick up positions on the first lap. But then again, he is out qualifying where that car's race pace is. So dropping back a couple of positions on the first lap of a Grand Prix is a bit 50-50 for me as to whether that really shows whether he's, not got that ability in a similar vein to an Alonso that we talk about all the time, always making up positions on the first lap. It seemed like George Russell was always losing positions, but whether that was because he was just out qualifying the car or whether we need to have a little look at his qualifying his first lap racing ability. And then secondary to that is his ability to battle with these top drivers. I always compare him to Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, and Lando Norris. I think that those comparisons are going to come throughout this season too. And when it comes to his, experience of battling for podiums, experience for battling for points, which can be really crucial. We saw the Mercedes drivers, Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc battling all out this season to get third place in the Drivers' Championship. We've seen Max Verstappen obviously battling for world championships at this point in his career, and George Russell just hasn't got that in comparison to those other three, which I think is something that will come over the course of this season, and whether he can step up to that challenge of fighting for those top positions, we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, we can draw from Sakhir, and I think this is something that's maybe a little bit over talked about. We have to remember that this was just one race, but at the same time, it was an incredibly impressive one race. It was, really impressive that firstly, he was getting close to Bottas in qualifying. This is why I have no qualms about him being able to qualify exceptionally well in that Mercedes car. He managed to get second place behind a Valtteri Bottas who had been at Mercedes for a good few seasons at that point in a car that didn't even fit him. And then he got into the lead, obviously, after the start of the race, managed to get in front of Valtteri Bottas and looked fairly comfortable. I mean, most people are saying at this point, George Russell should have won that race. I'm pretty much in agreement with that. It was Jack Aitken who lost his front wing, and then there was a safety car. And then Mercedes kind of got caught up in the safety car madness. I think he dropped down into 5th place after the safety car, after pitting under that safety car. And then it was so unfortunate because actually he managed to grab his way all the way back up into 2nd place, was gaining and gaining and gaining on Sergio Perez, who was in the lead of that Grand Prix, and then got a puncture. So ended up finishing 9th, and we didn't really get to see that George Russell, whether he had the guile, the tenacity to really step up and take that first place from somebody else in one of these Formula One Grand Prix, which I think if we would have seen, we'd have less questions about his ability to really fight at the tip top of the grid. Although it was only Sergio Perez, I say only Sergio Perez, it was Sergio Perez in a Racing Point car. It wasn't Lewis Hamilton in a similar car. It wasn't Max Verstappen in a Red Bull or Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz in a Ferrari. It was a slightly easier opponent to try and take the lead from compared to what he may come up against more consistently over the course of the 2022 season. So what can we expect from George Russell and Lewis Hamilton then moving into 2022? As much as I've waxed lyrical about George Russell at the same time as trying to be a little bit balanced from this, I'm a huge George Russell fan, but I do understand, he has flaws and he has question marks around him, and there's things that I need to see from him over the course of this season if I truly believe the hype around him being a future World Drivers' Champion. I mean, first of all, he needs to contend in a brand new car. He's been in that Williams car for 3 years. He's felt fairly comfortable there, and learning a new Mercedes car is always going to be a bit tricky. I think the new regulations coming in do help him out a little bit, and he has been testing with Mercedes since 2017, so he does have a little bit of an idea of the framework around the team and what he can expect to see when he does come into the garage for the first time. But it's always challenging stepping into a new team and a new car. I mean, just look at Daniel Ricciardo over the course of this season. In my opinion, a complete flop at McLaren in 2021. And he's a very experienced Formula One driver, has been at many different teams beforehand, and was considered probably one of the best drivers on the grid before the 2021 season started. I had him in my top 5, and he managed to only finish 8th. But that's for another time. We're talking about George Russell, but I do just want to use him as an example of even experienced drivers can struggle to move into a new team. A fairly new driver to Formula One, has only been in one team before Mercedes, could also struggle to make that step. Also, we've got to look at the fact that he is moving into a team with Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton has had some incredible teammates over the course of the years. He's had Alonso, Kovalainen, Button, Rosberg, and Valtteri Bottas, and now George Russell. There is a good few world championships in there between those guys. And Lewis Hamilton knows what it takes to be in a team with another driver. Let's just go back to those Rosberg seasons. I know that Rosberg was able to get the win over him in 2016, but apart from that, Lewis Hamilton was fairly dominant in that Mercedes car and won championships before that against Rosberg. So it is tricky to see where George Russell is going to step up and whether he can take that sort of Rosberg look to him over the course of the next couple of seasons, especially when Lewis Hamilton might only be in Formula One for 2 seasons. So the opportunity for George Russell to beat Lewis Hamilton is only going to be there for about 2 years. But then at the same time, George Russell then has to think about the other drivers he's going to be compared to. As I said, he's always going to be compared to Lewis Hamilton, but he's also always going to be compared to Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, and Carlos Sainz as well, because those drivers are going to be in and around those top places. They're going to be fighting for similar sorts of points and podiums, and the media love to find battles between drivers. We love to talk about heads to head. That's what made Lewis Hamilton versus Max Verstappen so interesting over the course of the season. It was a pure one-on-one battle, 2 different drivers in 2 different teams, and that's what we love to see. And George Russell is going to come under that scrutiny now. He is going to be compared to other drivers in other teams, and those expectations that are there with him, he can't have an off day. And we've seen, drivers come up from midfield teams and struggle under those expectations. It's going to be a difficult time for George Russell in this first year at Mercedes. And I think the main thing is George Russell can't see himself as Lewis Hamilton's number 2. George Russell has even said himself, though, to be fair, that he can't see himself as a support driver, and if he ever does see himself as a support driver, he might as well give up on the dream of being a Formula One world champion. I think, being a support driver is fine when you're sort of coming up in your rookie season maybe, and then right at the end of your career, but there's a good gap in the middle where if you see yourself as a support driver, you lose a little bit of that tenacity which it really takes to win races, win championships, and I think, at least he knows that going into this season already. And then I think George Russell secretly, he probably wouldn't say it, but I think secretly he wants to beat Lewis Hamilton this season. I don't know if he'd say that to the team or to the media, but in the back of his head, he's got to be thinking, if I can beat a 7-time world champion, moving into Mercedes for my first year, that would be an incredible way to start my Mercedes campaign. And he has to do that without disrupting the team. Yes, obviously Mercedes are going to want to continue this streak that they've got in the Constructors' Championship. Valtteri Bottas has been a really good catalyst for Mercedes just continually winning these Constructors' Championships. And George Russell still needs to be that. He still needs to fill those shoes of Valtteri Bottas in the Constructors' Championship sense. But in the Drivers' Championship, he wants to step up a massive amount. He wants to show that, Bottas was nowhere near Hamilton. George Russell, I think, will want to be right beside him, if not in front of him, by the end of this 2022 campaign. But that's just my opinion on George Russell. They're my thoughts moving into 2022. And to answer the final question, do I think George Russell can beat Lewis Hamilton in 2022? Yes, I think George Russell can. I think his qualifying pace and his ability to keep his position in qualifying will do him well. I think to beat Lewis Hamilton, though, he will have to have some incredible performances in there, not only in qualifying, but in the race, and also probably a little bit of luck go his way as well. We've got to remember Lewis Hamilton is one of the greatest drivers we will ever see in Formula One. And I know he's coming towards the end of his career, but he's still putting up battles and only just finished out on the World Drivers' Championship last year. So Lewis Hamilton is nowhere near dead yet, and George Russell has got a hell of a task on his hand. But as I said, that's just my thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to know what you think George Russell can achieve in 2022 in the comments down below. Whilst you're there, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I will see you next time.